Welcome to Time in History. I'm Professor Bill. We trust photographs. They show what happened. But images can be altered, people removed, crowds reduced, moments reshaped. Tonight, we examine the photographs that were edited, cropped, or buried. Not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. Look closely. Sometimes, history disappears without leaving a trace. This photograph was taken in Moscow in 1920. Vladimir Lenin is addressing Red Army troops during the Russian Civil War. Standing just beside him was Leon Trotsky, founder of the Red Army and one of the most powerful men in the revolution. But after Joseph Stalin consolidated power in the late 1920s, Trotsky was expelled from the Soviet Union. He was assassinated in Mexico in 1940. And in later official versions of this image, he was carefully removed, as if he had never stood there at all. In 1937, Joseph Stalin was photographed walking along the Moscow Canal. At his side stood Nikolai Yezhov, head of the NKVD, the secret police responsible for the Great Purge. Under Yezhov's leadership, hundreds of thousands were arrested and executed. But in 1939, he too was accused of treason, arrested, and later shot. Soon after, this photograph was altered. Yezhov disappeared from the image, consumed by the same system he once commanded. During World War II, this image of Benito Mussolini on horseback was circulated as a symbol of strength. He appears confident, commanding, alone. But in the original photograph, a stable handler was holding the reins to steady the horse. Before publication, the assistant was removed. The alteration was subtle, but it transformed a staged moment into a myth of power. In the 1930s, photographs of Adolf Hitler were tightly controlled by the Nazi propaganda ministry. Group images taken at party events sometimes included officials who later fell out of favor. When those men were arrested or politically sidelined, the photographs were quietly retouched. Faces were removed. Positions were shifted. The public never saw the edits, only the revised version of history. During China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, political loyalty could change overnight. Officials who once stood proudly beside Mao Zedong were suddenly denounced as enemies of the people. Some were imprisoned, others disappeared. In certain cases, official group photographs were altered, removing those officials from the frame entirely. The purge did not stop at public trials. It continued in the archives. In the early 1920s, several photographs captured Vladimir Lenin, surrounded by fellow Bolshevik leaders after the revolution. But as internal power struggles intensified, some of those men were arrested or executed. Later publications cropped the images tightly around Lenin, removing former allies from the frame. The revolution had been collective. The edited version suggested it had always belonged to one man. Mass rallies organized by the National Socialist German Workers' Party in the 1930s were carefully choreographed for the camera. In some published images, sections of the crowd were retouched or reframed to emphasize unity and scale. The purpose was psychological. A larger crowd suggested inevitability, and inevitability discouraged resistance. During the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939, photographs became powerful political weapons. Both Republican and nationalist sides controlled which images reached the public. Certain battlefield scenes were staged, cropped, or selectively distributed to shape international opinion. The camera did not simply document the war, it participated in it. Throughout the 1930s, official Soviet group portraits were repeatedly altered as political purges unfolded. High-ranking officials who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Stalin would later be declared traitors. When that happened, retouchers carefully airbrushed them out. The result was a changing visual record, where loyalty determined visibility. When the Hungarian uprising erupted in 1956, images of protests in Budapest spread across Western media. Inside the Soviet press, however, coverage was tightly filtered. Certain photographs were cropped to minimize crowd size or omit anti-Soviet banners. The streets were still full, but on paper, the rebellion looked smaller and therefore less threatening. In May 1945, photographer Yevgeny Khalday captured Soviet soldiers raising the flag over the Reichstag in Berlin. The image became one of the most iconic photographs of World War II. But the original negative showed one soldier wearing multiple wristwatches, likely taken as spoils of war. Before publication, editors removed one of the watches and darkened the smoke to intensify the drama. Victory remained, but even triumph needed correction. When thousands filled the streets of Budapest during the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, wide photographs showed entire boulevards packed with protesters. But in certain official publications, those same images were cropped tightly, reducing the visible scale of the uprising. A citywide revolt became a localized disturbance. The crowd did not shrink, only the frame did. Between 1958 and 1962, during the Great Leap Forward, China experienced one of the deadliest famines in history. Yet official photographs from that period often showed smiling workers and abundant harvests. Images of starvation were suppressed, rarely published, sometimes confiscated. The camera recorded prosperity. The countryside experienced catastrophe. One version survived in print, the other survived in silence. During World War II, photographs showed Joseph Stalin standing beside Western Allied leaders at major conferences. These images symbolized cooperation against Nazi Germany. But in later years, as Cold War tensions rose, some publications reduced or selectively reused these photographs. Former allies became ideological enemies. The handshake remained in archives, but faded from public emphasis. After the Chernobyl disaster in April 1986, early Soviet coverage was limited and carefully framed. Some photographs of evacuations in Pripyat were published without emphasizing the scale of contamination or panic. Wide angles that showed long lines of buses were sometimes replaced with tighter shots. The reactor had exploded. Radiation was spreading. But in print, the crisis looked contained. In 1943, mass graves were discovered in the Katyn forest near Smolensk. The bodies belonged to thousands of Polish officers executed in 1940. For decades, Soviet authorities denied responsibility, blaming Nazi Germany instead. Photographs of the exhumations existed, but the official narrative rejected their implication. The images did not disappear. Their meaning did. Between 1932 and 1933, millions died during the famine in Soviet Ukraine, known today as the Holodomor. While some foreign journalists documented the suffering, internal Soviet coverage showed little evidence of catastrophe. Images of starvation rarely appeared in official publications. The countryside emptied. But in print, production targets were celebrated. The absence of photographs became part of the narrative. During the mass deportations of Armenians in 1915 within the Ottoman Empire, several photographs were taken by foreign observers and missionaries. Many of these images documented forced marches and severe conditions. Some were confiscated. Others circulated abroad, but were suppressed domestically. The debate over terminology would continue for generations. The photographs remained as visual testimony. In March 1968, American soldiers killed hundreds of Vietnamese civilians in the village of My Lai. Military photographer Ronald Haberle captured images during the operation. For over a year, the massacre was not widely known. When the photographs were eventually published in 1969, they shocked the American public. This time, the images were not erased. They forced acknowledgement. On March 21, 1960, police opened fire on protesters in Sharpeville, South Africa, killing 69 people. Journalists documented the aftermath. While the apartheid government attempted to control the narrative, several photographs reached international media. The images contradicted official statements. They transformed a local protest into a global crisis. Sometimes, the frame escapes the filter. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, so-called human zoos displayed indigenous people from Africa, Asia, and the Americas in European and American cities. Millions attended these exhibitions. Photographs show families observing men, women, and children behind constructed village fences. At the time, it was marketed as education. Later, it became an embarrassment. The images survived, but the practice was quietly omitted from mainstream memory. In the United States and Canada, indigenous children were sent to boarding schools beginning in the late 19th century. Photographs were taken upon arrival: long hair, traditional clothing. Then, new photographs were staged after haircuts and uniforms. The message was visual: identity replaced, culture reshaped. The children remained. Their heritage was meant to disappear. During the Algerian War between 1954 and 1962, French forces conducted counterinsurgency operations that included interrogation centers. Some photographs documented detainees and detention facilities. For years, official discourse minimized or denied systematic abuse. The images existed in archives and foreign reports. Public acknowledgement came much later. The photographs did not change. The willingness to see them did. At the turn of the 20th century, photographs from the Congo Free State revealed brutal practices tied to rubber production under King Leopold II. Missionaries and activists circulated these images abroad. Within Belgium, public awareness developed slowly. The photographs became part of an international reform campaign. They were not erased, but for many, they were inconvenient. In the 1830s, thousands of Native Americans were forcibly relocated under U.S. federal policy in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Few photographs exist from the earliest removals, but later images documented survivors and displaced communities. For decades, textbooks summarized the event briefly. The scale of suffering was often reduced to a paragraph. Sometimes erasure is not about deleting an image, but about shrinking its importance. During the Cultural Revolution beginning in 1966, public struggle sessions were staged across China. Teachers, officials, and intellectuals were denounced before large crowds. Some photographs documented humiliation and violence, but such images were tightly controlled and rarely distributed outside official channels. The revolution was meant to look unified and righteous. Certain realities were not part of that frame. In June 1989, protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square were met with military force. One photograph captured a lone man standing before a column of tanks. The identity of the man remains uncertain. Within China, the image was heavily censored. Internationally, it became one of the most recognized photographs of the 20th century. It survived because it left the country. In 2004, photographs taken inside Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq revealed abuse of detainees by U.S. personnel. The images were digital, copied, transmitted, impossible to fully retract. Once published, they sparked global outrage and investigations. Unlike earlier eras, deletion was no longer enough. The camera had multiplied. Erasure became harder. During the Soviet-Afghan War from 1979 to 1989, official media coverage emphasized heroism and international duty. Images of casualties were limited. Photographs of returning coffins rarely appeared in domestic publications. The war lasted nearly a decade. Its human cost was real, but the visual record shown at home remained restrained. Between 1975 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia documented thousands of prisoners at Tuol Sleng prison. Each detainee was photographed upon arrival. Many did not survive. The regime kept meticulous records, but the outside world saw little at the time. After the fall of the government, the archive became evidence. The images had waited. In 1921, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, often called Black Wall Street, was destroyed during racial violence that left hundreds dead and thousands displaced. Photographs documented burned buildings and armed crowds. Yet, for decades, the event was rarely mentioned in textbooks. The images remained in archives and local collections. The silence lasted nearly a century. Erasure can happen without altering a single pixel. In 1947, the partition of India triggered one of the largest migrations in human history. An estimated 14 million people crossed new borders between India and Pakistan. Photographs show endless columns of refugees, overloaded trains, abandoned homes. The scale was immense. Yet outside the region, the event often receives limited space in global narratives. The images testify to magnitude, even when memory narrows it. In 1994, during the Rwandan genocide, approximately 800,000 people were killed in about 100 days. Journalists documented refugee camps and mass displacement. The photographs circulated internationally. Yet global response was limited while the violence unfolded. The world saw the images. Recognition came later. Sometimes awareness does not prevent erasure in real time. The 1918 influenza pandemic infected hundreds of millions and killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide. Photographs show overcrowded hospitals and masked nurses. Yet the pandemic unfolded at the end of World War I. Public attention remained fixed on the armistice and victory. The virus did not disappear from history. It was overshadowed by another story. In 1992, photographs from detention camps during the Bosnian War reached international media. Emaciated detainees, standing behind barbed wire, evoked comparisons to earlier atrocities in Europe. The images prompted diplomatic pressure and debate. They were not erased. But as years passed, public focus shifted elsewhere. Even powerful photographs can fade when attention moves on. During Guatemala's Civil War, which lasted from 1960 to 1996, thousands of people were forcibly disappeared. For years, many records were inaccessible. In 2005, a vast police archive was accidentally discovered. Millions of documents and photographs detailing surveillance and detentions. The images had existed all along. They were simply locked away. Erasure sometimes means delay. In July 1995, more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were killed in Srebrenica. Forensic teams later documented mass graves through photographs and excavation records. These images became evidence in international tribunals. They were not propaganda. They were proof. When regimes fall, photographs often become witnesses. During apartheid in South Africa, segregation was openly enforced through law. Photographs show signs marking spaces for whites only. The system was not hidden, it was displayed. Yet, outside the country, awareness developed gradually. The images existed in newspapers and reports. Normalization can be a form of erasure. When injustice is routine, it becomes background. When the Berlin Wall was erected in 1961, photographers documented families separated overnight. Images of barbed wire and concrete became symbols of division. For decades, the wall stood. When it fell in 1989, cameras again recorded the moment. The structure was dismantled, but the photographs preserved both its existence and its collapse. Memory outlasted concrete. To monitor ordinary lives became historical evidence. For decades, they had been tools of control. After the fall, they became instruments of transparency. The same photograph can serve power or expose it. Between 1976 and 1983, Argentina's military dictatorship forcibly disappeared thousands of people. In Buenos Aires, mothers of the missing gathered weekly in the Plaza de Mayo. Photographs captured them, holding portraits of their children. The regime tried to suppress dissent. The images turned absence into visibility. Sometimes, a photograph does not erase, it insists. In 1971, the Pentagon Papers revealed classified information about U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Newspapers printed excerpts and photographed stacks of secret documents. The government sought to prevent publication, The courts ruled in favor of the press. The images of printed pages became symbols of accountability. Transparency, once resisted, entered public record. In April 1975, a helicopter lifted evacuees from a rooftop in Saigon as North Vietnamese forces approached. The photograph quickly circulated worldwide. For some, it symbolized evacuation. For others, defeat. No one needed an official statement. The image communicated the outcome. Sometimes a photograph closes a chapter. On September 11, 2001, images of smoke rising from the World Trade Center spread globally within hours. Unlike earlier eras, photographs were transmitted instantly. The event was documented in real time. There was no opportunity for official revision before the public saw it. In the digital age, erasure became more complicated. The frame multiplied beyond control. In February 1945, leaders of the Allied powers met in Yalta to shape the post-war world. Photographs show Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin seated together. The image suggests unity. Yet history would divide them within months. The frame captured cooperation. The future revealed tension. A photograph freezes a moment, not its aftermath. In July 1969, Apollo 11 astronauts photographed the first human steps on the moon. The images traveled across television screens and newspapers worldwide. For many, they represented technological triumph. For others, skepticism followed. Yet the photographs remain part of scientific archives and global memory. Sometimes, an image becomes proof, and proof resists erasure. During the Watergate scandal in the early 1970s, journalists and photographers documented hearings and investigations that led to the resignation of a U.S. president. The images were not staged by the state. They came from outside it. In this case, the camera did not serve authority. It scrutinized it. Visibility can shift the balance of power. After the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, entire towns were evacuated. Photographs of abandoned classrooms and silent amusement parks later circulated globally. What had once been hidden became a symbol of technological risk. The buildings remain empty. The images remain active. Sometimes absence becomes unforgettable. In December 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. Photographs captured the moment quietly. An empire that had reshaped the 20th century ended without a battlefield. No cropping was needed. The symbol descended on camera. Power can erase people. Time erases power. Throughout the 20th century, photographs were altered in darkrooms with brushes and chemicals. Today, editing requires only software. The technology changed. The impulse did not. To control the image is to influence memory, and memory shapes history. A photograph captures light reflected in a single moment. It does not choose sides. It does not predict the future, but people do. People crop, retouch, suppress, and circulate. Some images vanish. Some return decades later. History is not only what happened, it is what remained visible. So the question is not whether photographs can be erased. The question is, who decides what we see?